John McMullen joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. You can read more from John at 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. John, what a wild Sunday it was. Let's start with tonight, though. Any thoughts on Josh Adams? I saw the hip thing, and he got put onto the injury report, a little setback, but is it worrisome enough that he might not play?
Well, it's worrisome enough that they listed him as questionable. So in theory, if something happens pregame, he could certainly be scratched and be a late scratch. Everything I get from the Eagles is they expect him to play. They expect him to be fine. But anytime something like that happens, there is at least a chance that things could go in a negative direction. And it seems like this organization has struggled at that position all year, trying to figure out the rotation, trying to figure out how to split things up. It seems like they've finally come up with a solution, and bang, another injury propped up.
Darren Sproles, the feeling is he will play tonight?
Yeah, I mean, he practiced 3 consecutive days, was at the walkthrough. So that's the plan. The interesting part of it will be how he's used and how much he's used. Doug Peterson intimated he doesn't want to just throw him in there and pretend he hasn't been out for 10 games. So it is going to be sort of a slow motion, I think, introduction back to the offense. And I think the bigger role you can count on is he's going to be the punt returner. But I do think it's interesting as the game wears on, especially if some of the other running backs struggle, if maybe Josh Adams is not performing because of the injury. It's going to be interesting if there's a key situation in the second half if Doug goes to Darren.
By the way, the NFL Network's Mike Garafolo reporting that Adams is on track to play tonight, so it looks like it is trending in that direction. We also have Sidney Jones, no Jalen Mills, Sidney Jones is in, Jalen Mills is out, Douglas is in, Hicks is out. So that secondary is still going to be a little shorthanded tonight.
Yeah, Vontae Monix is out as well, so it's Sidney and Rasul in, and we'll have to see how healthy they are, but that's a big improvement over Chandon Sullivan and Crevon LeBlanc will probably play in the slot, but when you don't have to play Chandon Sullivan, Devontae Bosby, I don't want to pick on those guys, but at least you have proven, and I don't even want to use that term, somewhat proven NFL players in Sidney Jones and Rasul Douglas that know the defense and have played before. So it's big to get some bodies back at cornerback for Jim Schwartz.
Yeah, I know this Washington offense isn't an explosive offense, but this is a team that, with Colt McCoy and Adrian Peterson, they want to run the ball here, obviously. So how does the Philly defense tonight kind of match up with what Washington will do on offense?
Well, it's a good situation for the Eagles. It really is, because Washington built this team a specific way, and that's to run the football behind a really good offensive line. And that offensive line is not what it was because of injuries. And then you had the quarterback who was part of that equation as a guy who didn't make mistakes. It wasn't going to throw the football all around the field and produce turnovers and those game-changing plays. So now it's Colt McCoy. Brandon Sheriff's not there. Both guards aren't there. It's a different team, and the Eagles should be able to handle this team from a defensive standpoint, even with the issues at cornerback. They're just not explosive.
Yeah. What about in terms of their offense? We know their 2 guards are out. So that could be a big spot for Fletcher Cox, and then having Timmy Jernigan in there. But that could be an area where the Eagles can maybe dominate in the run game, too, is by causing a problem in the middle.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question this could be a big Fletcher Cox game. I mean, Fletcher always gets the double teams, and he's going to continue to get that. But that's a weakness with Washington. You can't lose players like Sheriff and Laval and expect to not take significant hits. You saw what happened to the Eagles at cornerback when they had to go deep and go on the street and find people. It's hard to do. It's difficult to do. And it's especially difficult when you're replacing an all-pro level player in the case of Sheriff. You can't do it. So that's one of the weaknesses, and that's why one of the reasons I think the Eagles are shaping up pretty well in this game.
Yeah, John, and, one thing is for sure that the Colt McCoy thing, that's a big difference than having Alex Smith there, right? I mean, that is a big drop-off for them.
Yeah, I mean, they've tried to sort of spin it, and that's what you have to do when you go to your backup quarterback. Nobody knows it better than Philadelphia. You do have to change things dramatically. In the case of Alex Smith versus Colt McCoy, you have a guy who's going to take more chances, maybe extend plays, and maybe be able to make a bigger play down the field occasionally. But he's also a guy prone to mistakes. And as I said, that's just not the way Jay Gruden built this team to perform. This is not a team that can make a lot of mistakes, get behind, and then sort of catch up. That's just not how he envisioned it. We talk about it all the time. It's a small margin of error when you play that way, and that's what the Redskins face right now.
When you're looking at the Redskins offense, which guy can – because Chris Thompson's going to be back. We haven't seen him in a while. So which guy on that offense is the guy to kind of keep an eye on tonight?
Well, most people will go to Adrian Peterson, but that doesn't concern me as much as what you just mentioned. If Chris Thompson is back, you have that third down back, you have that receiving back out of the backfield. I don't know what it is with the NFL. They can't cover players like that. And it's not just the Eagles. You see it all around this league. The Eagles weren't playing yesterday. If you saw the Bears come back on the Giants, which was the game on here, obviously New York ultimately won it in overtime, but it was just wheel route after wheel route after wheel route to Tariq Cohen. And the Giants had no idea how to deal with it. We see the same thing with Kamara. We see the same thing with Gurley. Thompson is that kind of guy who can hurt you out of the backfield, and it seems like defensive coordinators in this league can't figure out how to deal with players like that. You saw another one, James White with the Patriots. I don't know what it is, Mike, but they can't deal with it.
Well, I know one thing is the Eagles don't really have that type of guy, right? They don't have the guy that can run that.
I don't think anybody has that type of guy, evidently.
No, I'm talking about on the offensive side of the ball. The Eagles don't really have.
No.
You know?
No, they don't, and that's where Darren Sproles was supposed to fit in and be that third down back and be the guy who can
Clement has not
football.
Become that guy.
No, he hasn't. At times, he's made big plays. You've seen him make big plays catching the football on the biggest stage, but he hasn't been consistent this season. No, they haven't found that player at least to do it on a consistent basis. And I think the way the league is going, everybody's going to be looking for that type of running back in the off season because it's easy. It's like stealing.
John, I know, the Eagles essentially, I mean, they got to have this game either way, but how realistic do you think a wild card berth is?
Not very. I think the latest number is 6%, from the probability people, Nate Silver. See, you have to understand the Eagles, if you look at the wild card situation, two things have to happen. First, they have to finish behind either Dallas or Washington. Most likely that would be Dallas. And then they have to win more than those two teams you figure to be in it, Minnesota or Carolina, both hold head-to-head tiebreakers on the Eagles. So if you envision it, that would sort of get you to 9 wins. You have to get to 9 wins, hope Minnesota and Carolina stay at 8. And to get to 9 wins, think about what has to happen. You also have, as I said, you also have to fall behind Dallas. So essentially, you're expecting to beat Washington, lose to Dallas, and then run the table, which includes the Rams and the Texans and on the road against the Redskins. 6% is possible, but that's why the probability is so low. It's extremely, extremely unlikely. If the Eagles are going to the playoffs, it's because they're going to win the NFC East.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, there's two teams ahead of them, Minnesota and Carolina, both of which, by the way, beat them, but both are just one victory ahead. And then Washington is the current sixth-place team. If you were to beat Washington tonight, I mean, you put yourself on the 6 wins with everybody else. So it seems that, you know, that second wild card would be in that 9-win range.
Yeah, but again, it would be 9 wins. From the Eagles' perspective, though, they do not hold the tiebreaker.
Right, they're in trouble if they're tied with those two teams.
Yeah. So if you look at Seattle's schedule, Seattle's in. I mean, they got San Francisco, they got Arizona. Even if they lose to Minnesota, they're going to be a wild card team. Then you talk about Vikings, Carolina, Eagles. You kind of X out the Redskins because the Redskins won't be in it because the Eagles will, in theory, be beating the Redskins twice. So as I said, you have to fall behind Dallas, and you have to finish ahead. You can't finish tied. You have to finish ahead of both Minnesota and Carolina.
What happens? What happens in the event of a 3-team tie there?
3-team tie, which can't happen because the Vikings have tied a game. So, if
that is right,
you know, if the Eagles and Carolina tie a game, which is very unlikely, so that's not going to happen because the Vikings already have a tie. So the only way it can happen is if the Eagles finish with 9 wins, finish behind the Cowboys, and Carolina and Minnesota finish with 8 wins. And again, the only path to that for the Eagles is beating Washington, losing to Dallas, and then running the table, which isn't going to happen.
Yeah, I'm looking. Minnesota's got Seattle, Miami, Detroit, and Chicago. So you're saying they would have to go. I mean, there's conceivable that they go 2-2 in those games and only get to 8.
It is very conceivable. The Vikings and the Panthers.
The Panthers play the Saints twice. I know that.
Yeah, it's very conceivable both of those teams finish with 8 wins.
Right.
It's very conceivable that both of those teams don't make the playoffs. That's not the issue. The issue is how do the Eagles get to 9 wins in second place? Because remember, if you're a wild card, that means somebody's ahead of you. Well, forget about Washington, as I said, because you play them twice. So that team that has to be ahead of you is Dallas. That means essentially you have to lose to Dallas.
But even if you beat Dallas, you're still. Even if you lose to Dallas next week, even if you beat Dallas next week, you're still a game behind them.
Agreed. But then, as I said, what happens is you play the Redskins twice, so you play the Cowboys. So somebody's losing those games in the NFC East.
Well, actually, if you win this week and you beat Dallas next week, you'd be 7-5 with. No,
7-6.
Right.
With 3 games to play.
And Dallas would be 7-6. You'd be tied with Dallas and beat them head to head.
And then essentially what you have to do.
You would have split with Dallas, but they have a better conference record than you.
And then essentially what you have to do, remember, Dallas has to finish ahead of you if you're going to be a wild card. Mm-hmm. So, again, and why it's at 6% by all the probability people is because the likelihood of all these things falling into place,
right,
and you beating the Redskins twice, you losing to Dallas, you beating the Rams, you beating the Texans, it's a possibility, but it's very unlikely. And then on top of it, Minnesota has to keep losing, Carolina has to keep losing and stay behind the Eagles. So 6% is 6%. There's a possibility, but it's a very unlikely possibility.
Right. And I say if you can get to 9, that would be your spot because Carolina, there's a good shot. I mean, they've lost 4 in a row. They fired a bunch of guys today, and they play the Saints twice. So theoretically, you could see them being an 8-8 team, you can see Minnesota, based on their schedule, getting to only 8 wins. So it'll be interesting to see if a 9-win team gets that second wild card spot, right?
Yeah, I think essentially a 9-win team is going to get it. I don't think it's going to be a 10-win team. But the issue is, can the Eagles get the wild card? From the Eagles' perspective, whether they win 9 or they run the table.
They run the table, they're going to get
unlikely. Yeah. But either way, they likely go in as the NFC East champion.
Gotcha.
So it's very unlikely that they're the wild card. There's a far greater probability in the 20-something% that they win the NFC East. So that's the far more likely path.
We'll get your pick for the game tonight coming up. McCarthy fired. I don't think it's a huge surprise. I guess the timing of it, like right after a game on Sunday, like not even wait until the next day. But, a lot of people look at it and say, hey, look, you give the guy a month to kind of get his bearings and then get his name back out there. So I guess not a gigantic surprise that he is out. It was going to happen at the end of the year. They got it done now, and he'll be coaching next year, you would assume, right?
Yeah, I mean, the early indications are Cleveland has a lot of interest. I always say, and I talked about it from Green Bay's perspective as well. I'm not even thinking about a defensive guy in this environment. So I do think he'll get another job quickly. I don't think it accomplishes much for Green Bay at this stage of the season. However, you're right in the fact that in some ways it might be a little bit better for him personally. But from the team standpoint, I think it was just a fractured relationship between him and the quarterback. We all know how that goes. And he's been a very good coach for a very long time. And Andy Reid's the perfect example here.
They mentioned Reid today, by the way.
All the time. Yeah, I mean, everybody has a shelf life. And at some point, people stop listening. And people stopped listening to Mike McCarthy, I think.
All right. So McCarthy's out there. Today, a lot of firings in Carolina, too. Essentially, the whole defensive staff is out. So does that point to Rivera possibly being out as well?
Yeah, I think the indications are certainly not good if you're looking at foreshadowing, especially if they don't. We just talked about the playoffs. If they don't become a wild card team and they continue this free fall, I think it's pretty clear he's going to be out. I think if they turn it around and they're able to get that second wild card, I think that might save his job. But remember that they have new ownership there. So anytime you make a drastic change, and ownership is even more drastic than, say, general manager, they usually want to make a big move pretty quickly to get their own people in there. So I don't think there's any doubt if Carolina doesn't turn it around and doesn't make the playoffs, Ron Rivera is probably not going to be back.
All right. What a day yesterday. We saw a 3-0 game in today's NFL environment. Can you believe that?
Yeah, in Jacksonville. And you can't figure out this league because Frank Reich and Andrew Luck have been so explosive since they figured it out early in the season. Jacksonville has been such a huge disappointment, not only offensively but also defensively with all that talent. And then they show up one particular Sunday, and it's 3-0. You cannot explain this league.
Not at all. And, how about Denver? I mean, Denver, the coach was going to be fired. They were going to get rid of the guy. I mean, I don't even know if they're going to make the playoffs, but they have now won 3 straight, beating Pittsburgh and the Chargers. Now, Cincinnati's no good, but they've won 3 straight. But they won the game on the road. I mean, all of a sudden, they're at 6-6. Indianapolis is at 6-6. Miami 6-6. And Baltimore is at 7-5 playing – with the backup, with the backup quarter, the Jackson playing quarterback.
Yeah, and the Broncos probably have the best schedule as we head down the stretch. So it's one of those things where people in Denver don't like the coach, they don't like the quarterback, and all of a sudden they make this run, And if they make the playoffs, maybe in some ways it actually hurts you long term, because then you probably can't move on from the coach.
It's going to be like Major League with the owner, like basically giving them like a regular plane and like breaking down all the whirlpools.
Yeah, I mean, there is one constant in the NFL. December, New England Patriots just put their foot down, and I think they're the favorites in the AFC again. And I keep looking at their roster, and obviously Tom Brady's age, and, man, they just keep figuring out a way.
Unbelievable.
And it's pretty amazing.
Well, and in the NFC, I mean, the Rams and the Saints, they're battling for the one. Awful loss by the Bears yesterday, so them and the Cowboys essentially fighting for 3-4 right now, unless Philly can make some noise there. You got Seattle, looks firm at number 5. We thought, although 3 weeks ago, we thought Carolina looked like they were definitely going to be the 5. They were 6-2, and it looked like they were firmly going to be the wild card team. They look like they're out now. So Seattle looks good. That's 6th spot with Washington, Minnesota, Carolina, Philadelphia, and then after that you kind of have, Tampa is 5-7, Green Bay 4-7-1. So it really looks like there are 9 teams in play in the NFC. And then if you look at the wild cards, you've got Seattle, Washington, Minnesota, Carolina, Philadelphia. So it looks like you've got 5 teams for really 2 spots.
Yeah, and I think, everything is there for the Eagles, as bad as it's been. They're set up against a wounded opponent tonight. As I said, it's far more likely it's going to be an NFC East title than a wild card. But they're still in this thing. And you mentioned all the teams vying for that 6th spot. They're not – all of them are not very good.
No. What about a loss tonight?
Loss tonight is going to be really difficult to overcome. I mean, that's going to cripple them. They're going to be behind 2 teams in the NFC East and the division. I just explained why they can't get a wild card. So this is kind of for both teams, this is kind of a game that is almost, not literally, but figuratively, a win it or you're kind of out, and you kind of realize it. And unless the Eagles can win out with the Rams and the Texans on their schedule and road games in Dallas and Washington. I mean, think about that. You would have essentially a team that's 5-7 that hasn't won consecutive games all year, and you think they're going to run the table on that group. This is do or die for the Eagles.
Kareem Hunt, who is his PR guy? Because that person needs to be fired.
Well, I'm not sure. I would say who are the PR guys in the NFL?
Well, that whole situation number one,
$13 billion industry, not have a good PR guy. I don't understand.
How did they let him go on TV yesterday?
Well, I think the NFL's not doing it. I think that's his agent trying to, put a 23-year-old kid out into sort of the torches and pitchforks of our society and what it is, and trying to rescue his potential career. I mean, I see both sides of the fence. Look, Kareem Hunt should be suspended. There's no question about that. But, I mean, I have a difficult time saying, okay, take the livelihood away from a 23-year-old kid who did something really, really stupid. I don't know if we want to go down that route. A lot of people do. I would imagine. I don't know if that's.
I would imagine, John. The Chiefs cut him right away. Or not right away. I mean, people are praising the Chiefs for acting quickly. They saw the video and they got rid of him. So whatever. If you want to give praise to the Chiefs, go for it. Now he'll be in the league again, right?
Oh yeah, no question. Too much talent. I mean, people make the Ray Rice comparison. The difference is Ray was an aging player coming off a bad season. 3.3 yards a carry. It's not even close. This is one of the best 5 running backs in the NFL. He will get another opportunity. The question is, how long do you wait? Everybody saw the pitchforks that the Redskins got for picking up Reuben Foster on waivers. That's just how we are. So that enters into the equation. But there's no doubt and it'll happen next year. Kareem Hunt will be back in this league. He's just too good a football player.
That'll be something to keep an eye on. Yeah, I agree with you. And you know what? Quite frankly, yes, there's going to be backlash. We know it. There's going to be backlash from that team. But just like anything, Michael Vick, there's backlash, and then it passes. So whatever team picks him up, I'm sure they'll be prepared to have some sort of statement or something ready to go. 2-3 weeks down the line, he's back out in the field, and people forget about it. That's the problem, right? When somebody picks up a guy.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they'll be prepared because the Redskins certainly weren't prepared for what they got with Reuben Foster. They handled that horribly. And then the second part is, look, that's what I was just saying. And you bring up Michael Vick. Now, I'm a dog lover. Now, if there's anybody who didn't want Michael Vick back in this league, it's me for the horrendous things he did. But I never once said he didn't deserve a second chance. That's what, I can't say that about anybody. And this is a kid that is, as I said, 23 years old. He's not going to jail. He's not getting anything from a legal perspective. And you're going to try to tell me he doesn't deserve to make a living. And some of these people, by the way, are the same people that support Malcolm Jenkins, and perhaps rightfully so, and all the activism he does about trying to give people second chances in the judicial system, in the legal system.
Right.
I don't get the hypocrisy.
Oh, absolutely. Like, well, the whole thing with Vic, too, was he was suspended and did his penance and went to jail and did his time and, essentially was penalized. You know what I'm saying? Is this kid going to be penalized?
Well, I don't think he's going to be penalized from a legal perspective. That's why the Cleveland police didn't look into it further, because it's a misdemeanor. Now, you can argue that, but you're arguing something that's far bigger than the NFL. The NFL will suspend him. It'll start at 6 games and might be more, and he'll serve his penance that way. I'm sure that won't satiate a large portion of the crowd, but I don't know what else he can do.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have that big of a problem with it, you have to go. This is far beyond the NFL. Yeah. You have to go through the whole legal process and ask yourself, why is this not a more serious offense in the state of Ohio?
Right.
I don't know. Ask the lawmakers there.
And then, of course, the Eagles, of course, have a need at that position potentially, and their name will pop up.
Yeah, it already has. I can tell you that people high up in the organization said no way, but only one person matters, and I haven't been able to talk to him, and that's Jeffrey Lurie.
Well, when you do, give us a call.
He's the only one. He's the only one that can make that decision. Yeah. So what other people believe or want, whether it's yay or nay, doesn't matter. It's up to Jeffrey Lurie. And by the way, I think he's going to end up back in Kansas City. I really do.
Wow. That would be interesting.
Yeah, after the off season, after everything dies down, as you mentioned.
Really?
I think that, yeah. I don't think anybody's going to pick him up on waivers at 4 o'clock. I don't know if something popped up since we're on the air right now. I find it very hard to believe somebody picked him up on waivers, but we'll see. And then it becomes a free agent situation. Yeah. And I could certainly see that happen.
All right, McMullen tonight. He's live at the link with more on the Eagles and and Redskins. Countdown to kickoff starts at 6, and he appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thanks, pal.
Yeah, 27-14, Mike.
Oh, I forgot. 27-14 Eagles. All right, 27-14. You're in.
All right, thanks, Mike.
You got it, pal.